Today we'll go over the new ideal division, plane and ship designs. And kicking things off with the new division designs, you can honestly just use the old ones from my existing division design guide. However, with the new additions, you can really see that division design is a lot more flexible nowadays, which makes it a bit hard to make a guide for it. You know, you can use the cookie cutters, but if you want to squeeze out a little bit more percent, then you can replace these things as I mentioned it in the guide. For example, if you're fighting in a very supply intensive area, then you can switch out your logistics companies for the helicopter transports, which will cost more fuel, but if you don't need the fuel, then you will be very happy to see the additional supply usage or the fewer supply usage from the helicopter transports. Similarly, if you're very desperate for the additional manpower, you can also switch out the Med-E-Vacs to get a little bit more trickle back, but you will have less experience loss. These should only be used if you really need the additional manpower, because the experience loss is much better than the trickle back. And if you really need an additional amount of supply or trickle back, you can also switch out one of your other support companies for the helicopter brigades. I wouldn't recommend doing this with both the logistics and the field hospitals, because flame tanks are super important, AA is super important, and engineers are super important. You're better off just saying, okay, I don't need the manpower, I need the additional supply for my pushing divisions, so I'm gonna swap out the field hospitals for helicopter brigades. Or you go ahead and say, okay, these are my holy boys, I can just swap out the logistics for the helicopter brigade to get more trickle back. You also used to be able to add Med-E-Vacs and the normal helicopter brigade, or the normal helicopter brigade and the transport helicopters, but they fixed that, so now you can't combine the helicopter brigade with the other helicopters anymore. So, you know, you could still run helicopter transports and helicopter Med-E-Vacs, but you can't run helicopter Med-E-Vacs and normal helicopters. Additionally, your engineers should be swapped out as soon as you're physically able with the assault engineer companies, simply because they have more attack modifiers. You know, they are worse at defending, and I mean, defense is a very useless stat anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much, but they will provide you with more important attack modifiers. And then similarly, if you're running support artillery, you could also swap it out with super heavy artillery, which technically is better. Now, with this, it is not, because I did use research also. A lot of this stuff is messed up, you know, like combat width and also the stats. But if you're able, you should technically switch out support artillery with super heavy artillery. I personally don't really care that much, because it's a ton of research that you have to invest, and also it is more expensive. But you know, technically, if you do like using artillery, super heavy artillery is better. And I mean, if you really like using artillery, you can also just use both super heavy artillery and the normal artillery, which is actually the case for the superior firepower division. The superior firepower doctrine really likes the additional support companies, simply because you just give your support companies an additional 50% soft attack, and you know, with the land cruiser or the super heavy artillery, that is just a lot. Now, the land cruiser division is a little bit weird, since technically, 2-width division is perfectly fine. The problem is just the HP. So, if this thing takes a little bit of damage, you lose your entire land cruiser. So what I like to do is go for a 10-width infantry division, and the land cruiser, very important, gets air attack, so you can skip out on the AA support company. That would be perfectly fine. Now, like, this should be your land cruiser template, and then additionally, you know, you add the medium flame tanks as you usually do. You add engineer companies as you usually do. If these are more offensive design divisions, then you add the assault engineer companies. If you need a little bit more supply, you add the logistics companies. And I mean, if I'm being honest, it's not really worth it. Just build normal tanks. Or mountaineers. Land cruisers are cool, but it's not really worth it. We also have a mass assault division, or mass mobilization, I suppose, where you would go for 12.8. The main benefit of mass mobilization is the abundant amount of HP that you have and trickle back. So you really just want to fill your combat width, so you can get mass charge, because mass charge requires 50% additional combat width. So the more combat width you can cram in there, the better it is. And the cool thing is about mass mobilization, or mass assault in general, you get a bunch of infantry combat width modifiers, which technically means, because your infantry has 20% less combat width, it technically is 20% stronger, because now you can add more infantry. There's one caveat: I would not use the Med-E-Vacs with the mass assault division, because the Med-E-Vacs give you less HP, which means you will take more damage. I'm such a dummy, I forgot about the most important division, the subscribe division. Now you could technically use an equipment capture division with the armored maintenance companies and a bunch of light tanks and closed pockets with this one to get enemy equipment, but I personally would just build proper divisions myself. But you know, if you are in a weird spot where you have the research to afford this, or you know, if you just want to have fun with it, then sure, there we go. This thing has 82% equipment catcher ratio, and you know, like, there's still a couple more focuses and such that, depending on the nation you play, you can also bump this even higher. I didn't design a proper flame tank, but of course you should also switch to the advanced flamethrower because that one has more stat. Additionally, with the Land Cruiser, there's a couple of different designs that you can go for. This one optimizes for soft attack because that thing will shred. If you can pump this thing out for your defensive divisions, then pretty much you don't need manpower anymore. If you have 2,000 men, that's all you'll need to decimate every single Soviet soldier. Now you can also go for more AA, you know, just stack as much AA on this thing as possible, where you can go like 360 AA or something. I personally don't think it's really worth it, since the AI will not really contest you anyway. But if you really need it, you can of course go for even more air attack. If I'm being honest, it doesn't really matter what you add here. Go for the most soft attack that you can and add AA on it and you'll be fine. The Land Cruiser has enough stats as is. The only thing that you have to pay attention to is you do need more than 4 kmh, but the game tells you when you try to save it, so doesn't really matter anyway. For the planes, you could build some cheap Strat nuke bombers, but I wouldn't really go for that because missiles have a higher success chance anyway, so missiles should be used before you go for Strat bombers for the raids. And then you can also use Motherships. They're gonna be fine against the AI. The good thing about them is they have a ton of range. If you can, you should still switch to the supersonic jets. And with the supersonic jets, we do come into another very interesting conundrum where, depending on the MIO that you have, you do have to adjust a little bit. Now you should go for as close to 100 air attack as possible because that's the air attack cap. And you know, if you have a worse MIO, that means that you put more gun on this thing, which also translates to having less armor on this thing. And then similarly with the Navy, why? If you want to, you can build a missile submarine. I don't really see the point. You can just use the existing Navy designs from my Navy guide. You should, if possible, switch out the engines for the nuclear engines, but you get them so late that it doesn't really matter. Similarly with the submarine, like, you can get the nuclear torpedoes, but once again, you get them so late that it doesn't really matter. The ideal submarine at this point should be the high-speed Walter engines, as many torpedoes as you can cram on it, and anechoic tiles, and then a good submarine MIO just to get your sub-visibility down as low as possible. Now, you can still go lower than this. There's focuses, there's the night fighting, which gives you less visibility and all that. But, you know, if you go below 10 sub-visibility, the AI probably won't be able to spot these things anyway. Now, the nuclear torpedoes, they will give you more damage and more torpedo hit chance, which is very good. They're also very expensive. The expensive part doesn't matter, the reliability doesn't matter, because the reliability pretty much just means if your submarines take damage, they will have a higher chance of taking critical damage, which these will not take damage because you can't spot these anyway. But you know, you don't need to add nuclear torpedoes. It would just be nice, but it doesn't really matter that much. And then of course the ice aircraft carrier. If you can go for it, feel free to do so. This is a little bit on the slow side. This will slow your Navy down, but the ice aircraft carrier has 50% more deck size, which means you can strap more naval bombers on it. So in the ideal game, you should micro these and have your Navy spot, and then you send this thing after the Navy. But who the fuck micros their Navy? I say that as somebody who enjoys doing Navy. You're not gonna micro your Navy. In most games, I wouldn't use this. I would still use the 1940 aircraft carrier, simply because the 1940 aircraft carrier is faster and you can research it. That's also the reason why I didn't use the modern battleships to show you a new design, because you're not gonna research these in a normal game. And if you do research it, then just use the templates that I used in the Navy guide and just put them here. Same stats, same thing, just better stats. If you enjoyed this guide, why don't you watch my existing division guide to know which templates to use and why, and please watch it.